Hello everyone, I am Melody P. Ariola
And I am Mariel Alvarez.
and we are the reporters for today.
And today, we will be discussing about philosophical thoughts of education.
But before that, what is a philosophy of education? It is referred on either the academic field of applied philosophy or to one of any educational philosophies that promote a specific type of vision of education.
So, as an academic field, philosophy of education is philosophical study of education and its problems, its central subject matter in education, and its method are those philosophy. The philosophy of education may be either the philosophy of the process of education or the philosophy of discipline of education. That is, it may part of the discipline in the sense of being concerned with the aims, forms, methods, or results of the process of educating or being educated, or it may be multidisciplinary in the sense of being concerned with the concepts, aims, and methods of discipline.
Chapter 1, Philosophical Thoughts on Education. But before that, here are our learning outcomes. At the end of this chapter, you should be able to discuss at least 6 philosophical thoughts on education.
Activity. Let's read this. In a scenario of a grade 3 science class. What is the function of the mouth?
To break the food into smaller pieces,
Very good. What about the stomach?
to digest the food,
Very good. Perfect. And the small intestines?
to absorb the food nutrients.
And now, let's analyze. What classroom scenario are being depicted by the comic strip and the teacher-student question and answer? So, in this comic strip, it is the usual and traditional scenario in the class discussion, where the teacher asks and the students answer. Before the teacher will ask the students to read about the topic, and then the day after that day, there will be having a recitation and students will answer based on what they have memorized the night. In short, there is a rote memorization here. And now, let's conceptualize isolated facts and debunking method. Depicted in the question and answer, proceeding in class are a common classroom scenario. Most lessons are devoted to teacher, asking the low-level questions and students answering with what they memorized the night. Teacher deposited these facts a day before and withdraws them from the next day. A perfect example of the banking system of education that Paulo Freire is much against us. It does not make the learner reflect and connect what he or she was taught to realize. We have nothing against facts, but isolated facts make no sense but become meaningful when seen in a relation to other facts. These facts, when combined with other facts with further questioning from the teacher, help the learner to see the meaning and the connection to his and her life. Example, the pupil learned that food is broken down into small pieces, which is digested by the stomach and absorbed by the intestine. So to connect the facts, teacher should ask the more questions like, what if the food is not choked in the mouth? What happens to the food in the small intestines? Will the small intestines be able to absorb the food and etc.? So this means that teacher is the one who deposits knowledge and learning in the students. And then, day after implementing knowledge, they have some exercises to know if the students can really learn about the topic that we discussed. So here are the summaries of thoughts of education philosophers on what should be taught and how learners should be taught. The first philosopher is Jean-Jacques 1632 to 1704. The empirical educator acquired knowledge about the world through the senses learning by doing and by interacting with the environment. Simple ideas become more complex through comparison, reflection, and generalization. The inductive method. So questions that the long traditional view that knowledge came exclusively from the literary sources, particularly the Greek and the Latin classics. He opposed the divine right of kings, theory which held that the monarch had the right to be an unquestioned and absolute ruler over the subjects. He also the political order should be based upon a contract between the people and the government. Aristocrats are not destined by birth to be our rulers. People were to establish their own government political leaders from among themselves. Civic education is must necessary. So people should be educated to govern themselves intelligently and responsibly. It is according to Ernstine 1984. Meaning that John Locke believes that we as a human, we can learn and we can get knowledge about something if we can socialize with other people. According to John Locke, education is not the acquisition of knowledge contained in the Greek books. It is learners interacting with concrete experience, comparing and reflecting on the same concrete experience. Comparing. The learner is an active, not a passive agent of his or her own learning. From the social dimension, education is seeing citizens participate actively and intelligently in establishing their government and in choosing who will govern them from among themselves, because they are convinced that no one person is destined to be a ruler forever.
Letter B is Herbert Spencer, 1820-1903, Utilitarian Education. Spencer's concept of survival of the fittest means of human development had gone through an evolutionary series of stages from the simple to the complex and from the uniform to the more specialized kind of activity. Social development had taken place according to an evolutionary process by which simple homogeneous societies had evolved to more complex societal systems and characterized with humanistic and classical education. Industrialized society required vocational and professional education based on scientific and practical utilitarian objectives rather than on a very general educational goals associated with humanistic and classical education. Curriculum should emphasize the practical, utilitarian, and scientific subjects that help humankind master the environment. Was not inclined to rote learning. Schooling must be related to life and to activities needed to earn a living. Curriculum must be arranged according to their contribution to human survival and progress. Science and other subjects that sustain human life and prosperity should have curricular priority since it aids in the performance of life activities. Individual competition leads to social progress. He who is fittest survives. Ernstine, 1984. For the comments of specialized education of Spencer versus general education is to survive in a complex society. Spencer favors specialized education over that of general education. We are in a need of social engineers who can combine harmoniously and findings of special knowledge. This is particularly true in the field of medicine. The expert who concentrates on a limited field is useful, but if he loses right to the interdependence of things, he becomes a man who knows more and more about less and less. We must be warned of the deadly peril of over-specialism. Of course, we do not refer the other extreme and superficial person who knows less and less about more and more. For Spencer's survival of the fittest, he who is fittest survives. Individual competition leads to social progress.
The competition in class is what advocates of whole child approach and socio-emotional learning or ESEL atmosphere negate. The whole child approach, a powerful tool for self-focused school has attendees. Each student learns in an environment that is physically and emotionally safe for students and adults, and each student has access to personalized learning and is supported by qualified and caring adults. By Frey and 2019.
The third philosopher is John Dewey, 1859 to 1952. Learning through experiences. Education is a social process, and so school is intimately related to the society that it serves. Children are socially active human beings who want to explore their environment and gain control over it. Education is a social process by which the immature members of the group, especially the children, are brought to participate in the society. So, the school is a special environment established by the members of society for the purpose of simplifying, purifying, and integrating the social experience of the group so it can be understood, examined, and used by its children. The sole purpose of education is to contribute to the personal and social growth of individuals, meaning that we can learn through experience and socializing with other people in a society. Here are the steps in scientific or reflective method which are extremely important in Dewey's educational theory. First is, the learner has a genuine situation of experience, involvement in an activity in which he or she is interested. Within this experience, the learner has a genuine problem that is stimulating thinking on how to solve a specific problem. So, third, the learner possesses the information or the research to acquire the information needed to solve problem. It is a gathering data on how to solve problem. Fourth is the learner develops possible and tentative solutions that may solve the problem. In this one way, one discovers their validity for oneself, meaning nakukuha sila ng information na kailangan nilang gamitin para to solve a specific problem that he or she encountered in her life. So the fund of knowledge of the human race, past ideas, discoveries, and invention was to be used as the material for dealing with problems. This accumulated wisdom of cultural heritage has to be tested. If it serves the human purposes, it becomes part of a reconstructed experience. This means that experience is the key to become more strong in facing any problem in life. Also, those people that are surrounded in our environment, they are the ones who are influence us and to teach us to be a strong person. The school is a social, scientific, and democratic. The school introduces children to society and their heritage. The school, as a miniature society, is a means of bringing children into social participation. The school is scientific in the sense that it is a social laboratory in which children and youth could test their ideas and values. In here, the learner acquires the disposition and procedure associated with scientific or reflective thinking and acting as a human being. The school is the democratic because the learner is free to test all ideas, beliefs, and values. The cultural heritage, costumes, and institutions are all subject to critical injury, investigation, and reconstruction. School should be used by all. It is being a democratic institution. No barrier of costume or prejudice segregate people. People ought to work together to solve their common problems, meaning that we need to be united and we need to act as one to attain the progress in one society. The authoritarian or the coercive style of administration and teaching is out of place because they lack genuine and inquiry and dialogue. Education is a social activity and the school is a social agency that helps to shape the human character and the behavior. So according to Orson A. 1984, that values are relative but sharing, cooperation, and democracy are significant human values that should be encouraged by the schools. Meaning that school, as part of society, it is the one who are a great influencer and build us to become a good member of society. According to John Dewey, the fund of knowledge of the human race does not disregard the accumulated wisdom of the past. This past is just the discoveries and inventions. Our cultural heritage will be used as a material for dealing with problems, and so it will be tested. If that they are not totally accurate, they will still be part of a reconstructed experience. This means that the ideal learner for Dewey is just not the one who can learn by doing. Example, conduct an experiment but one who can connect accumulated with wisdom of the past to the present. Also, according to John Dewey, schools are for the people and by the people, meaning that the schools are the democratic institutions where everyone, regardless of age, ethnicity, social status, is welcome and is encouraged to participate in the democratic process of decision-making. Learners and stakeholders practice and experience democracy in schools.
Letter D is George Scout, 1889-1974. Building is a new social order. Education is not based on internal truths but is relative to a particular society living at a given time and place. By aligning themselves with groups that want to change society, schools should cope with social change that arises from technology. There is a cultural lag between materials progress and social institution and ethical values. Next is instruction should incorporate a content of socially useful nature and a problem-solving methodology. Students are encouraged to work on problems that have social significance. School becomes instrument for social improvement rather than an agency for preserving the status quo. Teachers should lead society rather than follow it. Teachers are agents of change. Teachers are called on to make important choices in the controversial areas of economics, politics, and morality because if they fail to do so, others would make the decision for them. School ought to provide an education that afford equal learning opportunities to all students by Ornstein A. 1984. For the comments, school and teacher as agents of change. First is, for George Scans, school and teachers should be agents of change. Schools are considered instruments for social improvement rather than as agencies for preserving the status quo. Whatever change we work for should always be change for better, not just change for the sake of change. For the second is, teachers are called to make decisions on controversial issues. Not to make a decision is to actually making a decision, like the way problem solving should be the dominant method for instruction. Lag between materials, progress, and ethical values. Counts assert that there is a cultural lag between material progress and social institution and ethical values. Material progress of humankind is very evident, but moral and ethical development seems to have lagged behind. A friend once wrote the Egyptians had their horses. Modern man has his jets, but today it is still the same moral problems that flag humankind, and that with science and technology, we have become very powerful and yet powerless. We have conquered a number of diseases and even postponed death for many. We have conquered aging, the planets, the seas, but we have not conquered ourselves.
The fifth philosopher is Theodor Bramel, 1904 to 1987, Social Reconstructionism, as the name implies. Social Reconstructionism is a philosophy that emphasizes the reformation of society. The social reconstructionist content, according to Ornstein, 1984, that humankind has moved from an agricultural and rural society to an urban and technological society. There is a serious lag in cultural adaptation to the realities of technological society. Humankind has yet to reconstruct its values in order to catch up with the changes in the technological order. And organized education has a major role to play in reducing the gap between the values of the culture and technology. So the social reconstructionists assert that schools should, so according to Ornstein A. 1984, critically examine present culture and resolve inconsistencies, controversies, and conflicts to build a new society, not just to change the society itself. Do more than reform the social and educational status. It should seek to create a new society. Humankind is in a state of profound cultural crisis. If schools reflect the dominant social values, then organized education will merely transmit the social ills that are symptoms of the pervasive problems and afflictions that beset humankind. The only legitimate goal of a truly human education is to create a world order in which people are in control of their own destiny. In an era of nuclear weapons, the social reconstructionists see an urgent need for society to reconstruct itself before it destroys itself. It is according to Ornstein A. 1984. Technological era is an era of interdependence, and so education must be international in scope for global citizenship. For the social reconstructionist, education is designed to awaken students' consciousness about social problems and to engage them actively in problem solving. It's also according to Ornstein 1984. Social reconstructionists are firmly committed to equality or equity in both society and education. Barriers of socio-economic class and racial discrimination should be eradicated. They also emphasize the idea of an interdependent world. The quality of life needs to be considered and enhanced on a goal basis. It's according to Ornstein also 1984. Meaning that it is focused to become united in one goal and to act as one society. So even though sometimes the goals are not achievable, but we need to think from one specific to achieve the progress in our society where we are belong. Just like John Dewey and George Counts, social reconstructionist Bramel believed in an active problem solving as the method of teaching and learning. Social reconstructionists are convinced that education is not a privilege of the few, but a right to be enjoyed by all. Education is a right that all citizens, regardless of social race and social status, must enjoy. So to summarize, it is focused for the good of each and every one of us. We all know that if we are together in achieving goal, it may achieve success.
F is Paulo Freire, 1921-1997, A Critical Pedagogy. Critical pedagogy and dialogue versus the banking model of education. Paulo Freire, critical theorists like social reconstructionists, believe that system must be changed to overcome oppression and improve human conditions. Education and literacy are the vehicle of social change. In his view, humans must learn to resist oppressions and not become its victims. nor oppress others. To do so requires dialogues and critical consciousness, the development of awareness to overcome domination and oppression. Rather than teaching as banking in which the educator deposits information into students' heads, Freire saw teaching and learning as a process of inquiry in which the child must invent and reinvent the world. Teachers must not see themselves as the sole professors of knowledge and their students as empty receptacles. He calls this pedagogical approach the banking method of education. A democratic relationship between the teacher and her student is necessary in order for the conscientization process to take place. Freire's critical pedagogy is problem exposing education. Central element of Freire's pedagogy is a dialogue. It is love and respect that allow us to engage people in dialogue and to discover ourselves in process and learn from one another. By its nature, dialogue is not something that can be enforced. Instead, genuine dialogue is characterized by respect of the parties involved toward one another. We develop a tolerant sensibility during the dialogue process, and it is only when we come to tolerate the points of view and ways of being of others that we might be able to learn from them about ourselves in the process. Dialogue means the presence of equality, mutual recognition, affirmation of people, a sense of solidarity with people, and remaining open to questions. Dialogue is the basic for critical and problem-posing pedagogy as opposed to banking education, where there is no discussion, only the imposition of the teacher's ideas on the students, by Ornstein, 1984. For the comment, all of these education philosophers point to the need of interacting with others and to creating a community of inquiry, as Charles Sanders Peirce put it. The community of inquiry is a group of persons involved in inquiry, investigating more or less the same question or problem and developing through their exchanges a better understanding both of the question as well as the favorable solutions. By Lee, 2010. A community of inquiry will engage learners in active problem solving.
And now, let's apply. The modern explosions of knowledge has led an age to specialization with this concomitant with. A specialist knows more and more about less and less. An expert knows more and more about less and less until he or she knows everything about nothing. A related joke cleverly twists this saying. A generalist knows less and less about more and more. He or she knows nothing about everything. The question is, should schools produce generalists or specialists? Defend your answer. So, let's have first differentiate generalist and specialist. A generalist defined as a person who have multiple skills or a talent, meaning that generalist is a polymath, while a specialist is focused on training, simply means that everyone is not born as a polymath. And now, for me it's a yes, should produce generalists and specialists because whenever we are in school, our different skills may develop. We are guided by the teacher, and if we can perform and develop our skills, it may lead to be a good generalist and specialist that have a knowledge and understanding on the different aspects of life. Spencer is convinced that he who is most fit survives and so encourage individual competition. Read this article about the Singaporean education today and find out with whom you agree. Spencer's individual competition or the Singaporean educational system where competition is not encouraged. So, Here are the article. Learning is not a competition. No more first, second, or last in class for a primary and secondary students. Singapore. Whether a child finishes first or last will longer be indicated in primary and secondary school report books from a next year. A move which Education Minister Ong Ye Kung hopes will show students that learning is not a competition. The report books will not just stop showing students' position in relation to class or a cohort. The information to be tracked includes: first is the class and level mean. Second is minimum and maximum marks, and underlining and or coloring failing marks or pass-fail for end of a year result. Mean subject grades, overall total marks, and the L1R5 or English plus 5 relevant subject, L1R4, EMB3, and English Maths best 3 subjects, and EMB1 for lower and secondary levels. The Ministry of Education or the MOE said on Friday, September 28 that the change is to allow each student to focus on his or her learning progress and discourage them from being overly concerned about the comparisons. So from next year, all examination for primary and secondary pupils will also be removed, and whatever forms of assessment they have will not account towards an overall grades. It is according to Amelia Tech education correspondent on Facebook, Twitter, email on September 28, 2018 to PM SED. So, based on the article, I agree in the sentence that learning is not a competition. According to Spencer, that the root learning was not inclined. The schooling must be related to life and to the activities needed, meaning that he is not agree in a competition when it comes in learning, that I am supposed to be agree in that statement.
For question number 3, the following is an excerpt of the keynote address and Senator Shahani before the National Academy of Science and Technology at its 15th Annual Scientific Meeting at July 7, 1993 in Manila. Read it, underline those parts that emphasize development in moral and ethical values as most necessary to affect change. Do you agree with her thoughts and these underlined sentences? Keynote address of Senator Shahani before the National Academy of Science and Technology at its 15th Annual Scientific Meeting at July 7, 1993 in Manila. In essence, the Moral Recovery Program is a movement which aims to mobilize Filipinos for nation building through practical every exercise of human values in our daily lives as citizens, and to awaken us to the power of these values in achieving their individuals and national goals. Those values are free to charge. We do not have to borrow, nor to beg regularly and constantly from the outside world to obtain them. We only have to look inward, internalize them for our individual lives and for building our nation. To use current terminology, the Moral Recovery Program seeks to empower people, the poor, the middle class, and the rich, through the sustained application of human values and virtues to overcome our problems and build our country in accordance with our collective vision. For my underlined sentence, this Moral Recovery Program is a movement which aims to mobilize Filipinos for nation building through practical every exercise of human values in our daily lives as citizens, and to awaken us to power of these values in achieving their individual and national goals. Next is the Moral Recovery Program seeks to empower people, the poor, and the middle class at the rich, through the sustained application of human values and virtues to overcome our problems and build our country in accordance with our collective visions. We can also see the program as an attempt to complete the complex pictures of nationalism If nation building has its political, economic, and its cultural dimensions, it also has its moral and ethical imperative. This imperative is the most compelling dimension of nation building. It goes beyond the legislation of anti-graft measures of congressional investigation of wrongdoing in the government. We need to go back to basic and ask the fundamental questions. What is our vision of ourselves and of Filipino society? And how do we achieve that vision despite overwhelming odds? And what key values are needed to attain our goal? I submit that this vision and strategies in political will needed to realize it should constitute the main framework to build its nation. Nothing less will do. This combination of vision and action is the key to our national survival, rebirth, and renewal. In this context, the Moral Recovery Program becomes a major ingredient of an alternative strategy for national development. For my underlined sentence is this combination of vision and action is the key to our national survival, rebirth, and renewal. The ethics and politics. The close interrelationship between ethics and politics is obvious in our many problems, our large foreign debt, the states of permanent disrepair of our roads and public toilets, grafts and corruption in government, the perennial squabbling and intramurals between government bodies, and bureaucratic inefficiency, chronic problems in such vital areas as agriculture and industry. Rural development and land reform could be overcome if some of the values such as love country, discipline, honesty and accountability, and teamwork were practiced on a daily basis in government offices and political circles, as well as by the people themselves. For ethics and politics, the underlined sentence is chronic problems in such vital areas as agriculture and industry. Rural development and land reform could be overcome if some of the values such as love country, discipline, honesty, accountability, and teamwork were practiced on a daily basis in government offices, in political circles, as well as by the people themselves. Next is vision. The overall vision I have for our country has the following essential elements: reverence for all forms of life and the primacy of human values, a priority given to cultivations of spiritual and cultural life of the nation, the democratization of power, resources, and wealth, the right combination of free market economy and government intervention in appropriate areas at appropriate stages to provide for the basic needs of its citizens, a government which works for the good of the people, the development of our agricultural resources, and the environmentally conscious industrialization plan. And for my underlined sentence is democratization of power, resources, and wealth, the right combination of free market economy and in government intervention in appropriate areas at appropriate stages to provide for the basic needs of its citizens. A well-implemented agrarian reform program respects for human rights, including the right of women, and an independent foreign policy within the framework of global cooperation. In other words, we should have a vision which represents strong combination of human dignity, sustainable development, and appropriate economic growth, national interest, and global orientation. A tall order indeed, but a vision must inspire over the long term, shed light in the midst of darkness, and make possible the seemingly impossible. The underlined sentence, we should have a vision which represents strong combination in human dignity, sustainable development, and appropriate economic growth, national interest, and global orientation. Next is individual and national transformation. At this point, we come to the question, what is to be transformed or change the structures of society or the individual? In my view, both should be transferred, each dynamically affecting the other, but the starting point is always the individual or a group of individuals within institution. The empowerment of the poor must come from the poor themselves. The poor must help themselves. Others can only help them to help themselves. There is welcome opportunity in this country to help empower the poor, and such empowerment is vital to the creation of more empower the poor, and such empowerment is vital to the creation of more just social and economic structures. In individual and national transformation, the underlying sentence is the empowerment of the poor must come from the poor themselves. The poor must help themselves. Others can help them to help themselves. There is welcome opportunity in this country to help empower and the power, and such empowerment is vital to the creation of more empower and poor, and such empowerment is vital to the creation of more just social and economic structure. Next is human values, powerful building blocks. It is obvious from what I have said that human values are powerful building blocks in development of the nation. Yet, the non-economic and non-budgetary dimensions of progress, the growth, the moral and cultural elements have been conveniently overlooked or disregarded by the learned technocrats and theoreticians. PF developments perhaps to make way from smooth J1, not controversial discussion of development process. The technocratic and neutral language of development, which has evolved from the agenda of international institutions, has eclipsed TL1E moral choices which have to be made in the development process. For my underlined sentence is the moral and cultural elements have been conveniently overlooked or disregarded by the learned technocrats and theoreticians. PF developments perhaps to make way for smooth J1. Terms like equity, social justice, and distributive justice, when repeated over and over again without any explanation of the painful ethical choices which have to be made by individuals and government in order to achieve them, cannot touch the hearts and minds of the popular, the rich, the middle class, and the poor, on whom the burden of transformation rests. Development is, after all, a grassroots-oriented process, and the challenges in mass mobilization for the people and not political expediency. In human values, the powerful building blocks, the underlying sentence is terms like equity, social justice, and distributive justice. Next is a grassroots-oriented process and a challenge in mass mobilizations for the people and not political expediency.
Number 4 question is, if you cannot bring the learners to the world, bring the world to the classroom. Will this go with John Dewey's philosophy of education? Explain your answers. So, as a teacher, it is your responsibility to make your students to experience the world. Rather, it is your responsibility to make them understand the world. It is your responsibility to make their learning is not only confined to what you teach inside the four corners of the rooms. A teacher brings the world to the students through his or her tutelage.
In question number 5, considering the mission statement to protect and promote the right of every Filipino to quality, equitable, culture-based, and complete basic education, can we say that Philippine educational system is in a sense equitable? What actions and what recent legislations and proofs that the Philippines give equal access to quality education to its citizens? For my answer, I assume you are asking regarding the phenomenon as a whole, because the Philippines does have some really good educational institutions. However, I understand your question. You must have observed and encountered the worst of it. For question number 6, is pre-tertiary education really fruitful in the sense that it is the poor who are ended benefited? Justify your answer. Yes, that is if they get educated. Knowledge is understand asset that can lift people out of poverty. When it is knowledgeable skills, then you have the opportunity to make money.
Number 7 question is, prior or post, the banking method is characterized as a vertical relationship, while the critical pedagogy is characterized by a horizontal type of relationship. So, here are the figure below. So, based on the figure, it shows that if the transfer of knowledge from the teacher and to the students, it is what the banking method really is. This addition teaching is a linear in a way that the teacher is the source of knowledge, while the students are its receivers. Literally, students are like bank. The teachers deposit or transfer knowledge to them. Hence, we can say that the banking method is a teacher-centered teaching approach. To conclude their ideas in philosophical thoughts on education, according to the 6th philosopher, so the first philosopher is John Locke, the empiricist. According to him, that education is not acquisition of knowledge. It is contained in the classics. It is learners interacting with concrete experience. The learner is an active, not a passive agent of his or her own learning. From the social dimension, education is the seeing citizens participate rather actively and intelligently in establishing their government and in choosing who will govern them from among themselves. They are of the thinking that no one person is destined to be a ruler forever. This is in keeping with anti-political dynasty view.
Spencer, the utilitarianist. To survive in a complex society, Spencer favors specialized education over of general education. The expert who concentrates on a limited field is useful, but if he loses sight of interdependence of things, he becomes a man who knows more and more about less and less. We must warn of the early peril of over-specialism. Of course, we do not prefer the other extreme, the superficial person who every day knows less about more and more, who is fittest person and who every day knows less and less about more and more. The competition in class is what advocates of whole child approach and socio-emotional learning or SEL, atmosphere approach and socio-emotional learning atmosphere negate. The whole child approach, a powerful tool for self-focused school, has estimates each students learn in environment that physically and emotionally safe for students and adults, and each student has access to personalized learning and is supported by qualified and caring adults. Last is the highlighted words emotionally safe and caring adults point to no competition, for competition works against an emotionally safe environment.
Number 7 question is, prior or post, the banking method is characterized as a vertical relationship, while the critical pedagogy is characterized by a horizontal type of relationship. So, here are the figure below. So, based on the figure, it shows that if the transfer of knowledge from the teacher and to the students, it is what the banking method really is. This addition teaching is a linear in a way that the teacher is the source of knowledge, while the students are its receivers. Literally, students are like bank. The teachers deposit or transfer knowledge to them. Hence, we can say that the banking method is a teacher-centered teaching approach. Schools are for the people and by the people. Schools are the democratic institution where everyone, regardless of age, ethnicity, social status, is welcome and encouraged to participate in the democratic process of decision making. Learners and stakeholders practice and experience democracy in schools.
George Counts, building a new social order, schools and teachers should be agents of change. Schools are considered instruments for social rather than as agencies for preserving the status. Whatever change we work for should always be change for the better, not just change for sake of change. Problem solving, like the way, should be the dominant method for instruction. There is a cultural lag between material progress and social institutions and ethical values. Material progress of humankind is very evident, but moral and ethical developments seem to have lagged behind. It's very evident, but moral and ethical developments seems to have lagged behind.
Next is Theodore Bramell, the social reconstructionist. Social reconstructionist is critically examine, present culture, and resolve inconsistency, controversies, and conflicts to build a new society, not just to change the society itself. Technological era is an era of interdependence, so education must be international. School for global citizenship. Paulo Freire, the critical pedagogy versus banking method. He implied that the critical pedagogy and dialogue in the contrast to the banking system of education. Learners are not empty receptacles to be filled.
That would be all our discussion for today, and we hope you learned something for it. Thank you!
So now let's check for understanding. Number 1.
Explain in a sentence why each education philosopher was associated with this given word. First is John Locke, the empiricist. Second, Spencer, the utilitarianist. Third, John Dewey, experience. George Counts, building a new social order. Theodore Bramell, the social reconstructionist. And the last is Paulo Freire, critical pedagogy versus banking method.
For question number 2, make a table summary of the philosophies of education. For number 1 column, the philosopher. Second, philosophy on aims and methods of education. Last is classroom or school application.
Let's reflect. It is double entry journal. We have 2 columns. The first column is 2 things I learned from this chapter. From the second column, my thoughts or reactions.
For activity, let's clean first. For number 1, which is not true of social reconstructionist. A. Use of problem solving. B. Study of the great books. C. School as an agent of change. Letter D. Introduce a new society living. Number 2, which teaching practice goes with the banking system of education, which was contrary to Paulo Freire's educational thought. A. Rote memorization. Letter B. Project-based learning. Letter C. Problem-based learning. Letter D. Community of inquiry.
Number 3 question. For which teaching will social reconstructionists be? A. Stress on isolationism. B. Inequality and inequity as normal for an international society. C. Building of an interdependent world that is international in scope. D. Narrow concept of nationalism. Number 4 question. Why is Spencer's educational thoughts described as utilitarian? A. He emphasized vocational and professional education based on scientific and practical. B. He stressed on general educational goals associated with humanistic and classical education. C. he stressed a balance of specialized and general education in the curriculum. D. He eliminated the vocational and professional education component of the curriculum.
Last is question number 5. For which educational practice was John Dewey? A. Problem solving. B. Banking method. Letter C. Emphasis on the humanities. Letter D. Teaching of the classics.